can still see her face. Lily, my baby girl, sitting across from me in our kitchen 2 days ago. She'd always been so strong, so independent, but when she started talking about that night, the tremble in her voice hit me harder than any punch ever could. She told me about the party, how she thought she could trust her new friends, how everything changed in a moment. The bastard's name never came up, but it didn't have to. I was going to find him. I'm no stranger to digging for the truth in dark places. Hell, I spent most of my life neck deep in the shadows, back when I played the game as a black hat hacker. Back then, I wasn't answering to anyone. Breaking into systems, stealing data, it was all just code and clicks to me. Then, the government caught wind of my talents. They made me an offer. And now? Well, I work for them. Officially, anyway. But some skills, they never go away. Now, those skills are the only thing keeping me sane. I sit in my office, the only light coming from the glow of my monitors, fingers dancing across the keyboard. I've got 2 worlds running simultaneously, my government work on one screen and my personal investigation on the other. But only one of them has my full attention tonight. Lily told me about the night at the party, how everything felt fine until it didn't. And now, every time I blink, I see her eyes as she choked on those words, describing the way her world came apart. I'm not a man who likes feeling helpless, so here I am, doing what I do best. The university's digital ecosystem is easy to breach. Students think they're invincible online, leaving trails of personal data behind them like breadcrumbs. I follow those breadcrumbs through social media posts, private group chats, and encrypted files. It's all there, waiting for someone like me to sift through it. Hours pass, maybe days, it's all a blur now. Time doesn't mean shit to me when I'm in the zone. Then I find it, buried in a private group chat, a digital cesspool where frat boys swap stories, like predators bragging about their latest kill. There's one guy who stands out, Kyle Rivers, smug prick. He talks like he owns the world, boasting about his conquests as if women are just prizes. The anger hits me so fast, it feels like a physical blow. I scroll further and there it is, details about that party. The same party Lily went to. He didn't even bother hiding it. He actually joked about how easy it was to spike someone's drink. I grip the armrests of my chair, knuckles turning white. The pieces fall into place, and I finally have a name for the monster who hurt my daughter. Kyle fucking Rivers. It's not enough to know who he is. I need more. So I dig deeper into his social media, into his life. It doesn't take long to crack his accounts. I'm good at what I do. I've got his schedule, his address, his habits. I know where he goes, what he buys, who he talks to. I even know what time he wakes up every morning, right down to the minute. The idea of walking up to his front door and putting an end to this crosses my mind more than once. But I'm not some thug, not anymore. I need to be smarter than that. Careful. I log out of the government system, no more distractions. This is personal. I open a private network, a dark corner of the web that I haven't touched in years. It's where I used to do my real work, back when morality was more of a suggestion than a rule. I've been clean for a long time, but now, well, some things are worth getting your hands dirty for. I lean back in my chair, staring at Kyle's smug face on his Instagram profile. He's got no idea what's coming for him. The government doesn't teach you what to do when justice fails you, but life does. I'm not thinking about the consequences, not really. All I can hear is Lily's voice in my head, and all I can see is the man who took her power away. I don't give a damn about my future, about what comes next. As I plot my next move, one thought surfaces through the haze of rage. I will smile in my mugshot. Here I come, Kyle. I knew what I was about to do could put me on the wrong side of the law again, but I didn't care. That motherfucker posted about going to a frat party the next evening, and I knew that someone else's daughter was at risk. I could not let another girl go through that, nor another father to feel as impotent as I did for not being able to protect their daughter. I needed to get there. I told work I needed a week off to handle some family things, and I told my family I'd be gone for a few days. Some client site visit, routine contractor stuff. My wife barely questioned it, distracted by work, and Lily, well, she didn't have the energy to care anymore. She hasn't been the same since the night she told me what happened. The guilt gnaws at me daily, a constant reminder of how I failed to protect her. But this trip, it wasn't about failing. It was about taking action. I was gonna fuck Kyle Rivers' life up so badly, and he had no idea. This is beyond revenge. This is about recompense. Exodus 21:24 style. What he took away from Lily is what I will take from him. Oh, the thought of my endgame gave me goosebumps. The frat house party was your typical college scene. Music blasting, students packed shoulder to shoulder, all of them too drunk or too indifferent to notice me walking in. A six-pack of cheap beer in hand, I blended in. I wasn't here to socialize. I was here to watch. Kyle was already there, chatting up some girl who looked like she trusted him. I knew that look. I'd seen it before. My gut twisted as I positioned myself where I could watch, waiting for the moment when the real Kyle would show himself. Recording everything on my AR glasses with the recording safety feature hacked and disabled so no one knew I was recording. Of course, my wife called these another useless geeky toy. Guess they aren't so useless now. It didn't take long. His hand, subtle but deliberate, slipped something into her drink. My hands clenched the beer bottles so hard I almost shattered them, but I kept my cool. This was the proof I needed. Calmly keeping my eyes in his direction to make sure I recorded him in the act, while using every bit of willpower to keep myself from suffocating this motherfucker with his own cock down his throat. I wanted to bleach my eyes. I almost vomited in my mouth. The video felt like a small victory, but it wasn't enough. Not by a long shot. I wasn't just after one video of Kyle slipping something into a drink. I wanted to destroy him. I needed to make sure he couldn't do this to anyone else, ever again. I also needed to save the girl. How the fuck was an overweight keyboard warrior like me gonna do that against a fuckton of drunk jock types? My mind raced. I couldn't storm in and stop him right there without blowing my cover and getting my ass kicked in the process. So I thought bigger, smarter. That's when an idea hit me. I'm a keyboard warrior. So get to a fucking keyboard quickly. I stepped out of the house and back to my car, flipping open my laptop. A few keystrokes later, I was inside the campus police network. From there, it was easy to trigger an emergency alert. Active shooter reported at the fraternity house. I hit send, and within minutes, chaos erupted. Kids scattered like roaches, sprinting in every direction, while I casually drove away, watching the panic unfold in my rearview mirror. The satisfaction should have felt sweeter, but it didn't. Not yet. Exposing Kyle was the next move, but it had to be thorough. I wasn't just after him. I was after anyone who participated in these assaults. Back in my hotel room, I hacked into the security systems of other fraternities on campus. There were cameras. 4 of them had caught the frat parties of the past month, and after some digging, I found the footage I was looking for. Kyle spiking drinks, leading girls upstairs. My blood ran cold as I clicked through more clips. More than once, another frat boy entered the room after Kyle. A new girl every time. Not Lily, thank God, but someone else's daughter nevertheless. Someone else's baby girl. My hands shook as I watched more evidence pile up. There were multiple rapists and multiple victims, but I didn't want the police to handle this quietly. The system had already failed Lily. I wasn't going to let it fail these other girls. I spent the next few hours trimming the videos, extracting the clearest evidence of each assault. Then, I tracked down the parents of every victim I could identify. One by one, I sent the videos to them along with a note. My daughter is one of their victims, just like yours. It's time we make our voices heard. The emails sent, I closed my laptop, exhaling the breath I didn't realize I was holding. I felt hollow. This wasn't over. This wasn't even close to over. As the sun began to rise, the adrenaline that had kept me going started to fade, and something darker replaced it. A gnawing, bitter feeling that the next move would change everything. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about Kyle anymore. This was about all of them. And I wasn't done yet. Not even close. It was 3:27 a.m., and I was still staring at my inbox. I kept refreshing it like a man possessed, waiting for something. Anything. The hotel room was suffocatingly quiet. The only sound the occasional click of my mouse as I scrolled through the same emails over and over. My nerves were frayed, my mind racing. Had the parents received the footage? Were they too devastated to respond? Or worse, were they going to do nothing? I looked at the clock. 6:33 a.m. My eyes burned from the lack of sleep, and then ping. The first response. I opened it quickly, my stomach in knots. It was a mother. Her message was frantic, filled with disbelief and gut-wrenching pain. She had no idea her daughter had been a victim until now. The tears in her words were palpable. My hands shook as I read her pleas for help, her shock turning to rage as the email progressed. Her pain mirrored mine, and I realized this wasn't going to be a quiet conversation. This was going to explode. Then the floodgates opened. Every few seconds, another email poured in. Some parents were livid, immediately demanding to go to the police. Others were in disbelief, clinging to denial, not ready to face the harsh reality that their daughters had been violated. A few were eerily quiet, hesitant. They wanted justice, but like me, they weren't sure the system could be trusted. The tension grew with each reply, the air thick with emotions that had been held back for too long. The idea of relying on law enforcement was tearing the group apart. I knew I had to act before the situation spiraled out of control. Listen, please. Just give me 5 minutes, I typed back in a group email. 5 minutes tonight on a Zoom call. If you don't agree with my plan, we can hand everything over to the police. But I need you to hear me out first. There was silence on the other end. The longest 2 minutes of my life passed before the responses came in, reluctant but willing. The parents agreed to a Zoom call later that evening. I had until then to calm my nerves and solidify my plan. That night, we gathered on the call. It didn't take long for the conversation to heat up again. One father, a big guy named Greg, immediately wanted to storm the police station. We've got the evidence. Let's fucking bury these assholes. Others agreed, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Then, another father, arms crossed, muttered something about the legal ramifications of vigilante justice. The discussion started to turn into a shouting match, voices overlapping, emotions raw and untethered. Stop! I barked, bringing the chaos to a halt. Their faces snapped back to the screen. Listen, I get it. I do. But I need you to listen to me for just 5 minutes. After that, if you still want to go to the police, I won't stand in your way. But I have a plan that can do more than just take Kyle down. We can take down the whole operation. I laid out my strategy. It wasn't just about Kyle. It was about the drug dealers, the suppliers, the frat boys, and everyone who enabled this nightmare. I explained how I'd tracked their movements, found the drug routes, connected the dots. We could find the supplier, expose Kyle right in the middle of the act, and then send the evidence to everyone, the news, the police, their friends, their families. No one would escape the fallout. A heavy silence followed. Then, Claire's dad, a grizzled ex-Army Ranger, spoke up. Or, we could stage our own intervention, pose as law enforcement, Make sure Kyle doesn't get too far before we step in." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You mean we take control of the situation ourselves?" "Exactly," he said, leaning forward. "We can storm the party when Kyle's about to strike, grab him, and make sure the bastard knows he's done." One of the other dads snorted. "Fuck it, we're gonna be committing a few crimes here anyway. What's another in the grand scheme of things?" The tension in the room broke with a few nervous chuckles. The plan was coming together. Over the next 2 weeks, we tag-team surveillance, rotating shifts like clockwork. It didn't take long to trace the drugs back to the suppliers, a local gang that fed the fraternities their dirty little secrets. I compiled everything, names, addresses, GPS trackers, security footage, into mind maps that would later blow this case wide open. Then the night came. Another party. Another post from Kyle. This time, he'd reached out to his dealer to stock up on roofies. We knew the drill by now, and we were ready. Claire's dad volunteered to sneak into the frat house during the day, planting hidden cameras in every room. Vicky's and Melanie's dads had gone full tactical, buying black outfits from the army surplus store. We weren't just prepared. We were a goddamn operation. Now all that was left was to wait. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat in my car, adrenaline humming through my veins. The trap was set, and by the end of the night, Kyle's life would be over in more ways than one. We just had to hurry up and wait for the coming darkness to swallow him whole. The night was perfect, the plan was airtight, and we were ready. The team of parents had evolved from grieving and enraged into something far more lethal. A cohesive unit bent on justice. My hands shook with anticipation as I stared at the screens in front of me, waiting for Kyle to make his move. We'd already wired the house with cameras, set up our blackout gear, and tracked the drug dealers and frat members involved. The pieces were falling into place. As I monitored the cameras, Claire's dad, John, gave me the all-clear from his position. The frat boys were gathering, the party atmosphere slowly ramping up. Kyle hadn't yet arrived, but we knew he would. It was only a matter of time. Vicky's and Melanie's dads were stationed outside, blending in with the students to maintain surveillance. I kept replaying the plan in my head: capture Kyle in the act, intervene at the last second, and then blow the whole thing wide open. My heart pounded as I checked the feed for what felt like the 100th time when something caught my eye. One of the parents, Steve, was acting strange. I watched as he slipped away from his post, heading into an alley. My pulse quickened, something gnawing at my gut. What was he doing? I switched to the alley camera, and there he was, Steve, talking to someone in a dark hoodie. My stomach dropped as I zoomed in, barely able to make out the exchange. Money. A bag of something. It didn't take long to figure it out. Steve wasn't just a concerned father. He was in on it. The drugs, the cover-ups, it all made sense now. He was tied to the suppliers, probably using the frat parties to move the product. My mind raced. If Steve was working with the gang, then everything we'd planned was at risk. If he found out we were this close, he could sabotage the entire operation. I watched the screen, heart pounding, trying to decide what to do. Do I confront him? Pull the others aside? There was no time. Kyle had just arrived at the party, and Steve was making his way back, slipping into his role like nothing had happened. I couldn't believe it. The man was a goddamn snake. Kyle wasted no time getting back into his routine. He scoped out the room, found his target, a blonde girl barely able to keep her balance, and I watched him slip something into her drink. The moment of truth was approaching, but now we had an added complication. Steve. My mind raced through the options. Confronting him now would blow everything, but keeping quiet? That might be even worse. Suddenly, Steve's voice crackled over the radio. Everything's in position. Let's move. His tone was calm, too calm. I knew I couldn't trust him, but I needed the others on board. I signaled the team to hold off for just a minute. I needed time to think. The weight of my next move hung heavy over me, and I knew whatever I did next could make or break this operation. We had Kyle in our sights, but now there was another threat lurking, one far closer than I had anticipated. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. My stomach twisted, and my mind raced as I weighed my options. Confront Steve and risk blowing our cover, or let the plan continue, all while keeping one eye on him. I had no time to decide. Kyle was already at the party, and the girl he'd targeted was teetering dangerously close to unconsciousness. Steve, meanwhile, played his role perfectly, seamlessly integrating back into the group. He was good. Too good. The plan had to move forward. Everything's in position. Let's move, Steve said over the radio, his voice steady, but it grated on me like nails on a chalkboard. I had to suppress the urge to call him out right there and then. Instead, I signaled the team to continue, my heart pounding in my chest. Steve could wait, Kyle couldn't. I wasn't going to lose sight of the real target. I switched my focus back to the camera feed. Kyle led the girl upstairs, his hands firm on her waist as she swayed, unaware of the nightmare that awaited her. My fists clenched so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I could feel my breath quicken as I watched him guide her into one of the frat's bedrooms. He closed the door behind them, and for a moment, my heart stopped. John, stationed outside, signaled to me. "We're ready when you are." I waited. Timing was everything. Too soon, and we wouldn't have enough to bury Kyle. Too late, and I wouldn't be able to live with myself. On the screen, I watched in horror as Kyle removed the girl's shirt, his grin widening. The bastard was enjoying every second of this. I nearly stood up from my chair, ready to storm the house myself, but I stopped when I saw him reach into his pocket and pull out a condom. His fingers fumbled with the wrapper, and just as he was about to put it on, I gave the signal. Go! In an instant, chaos erupted. The pretend cops, fathers dressed in black tactical gear, stormed the house, pounding on doors and screaming orders. The party exploded into a frenzy of panicked students, running in every direction. Upstairs, Kyle froze, startled by the commotion. He fumbled with the condom, dropping it to the floor in his shock. That was our cue. John, along with Greg, Steve, and a few others, burst into the room, catching Kyle in the act. I watched through the camera as he stumbled back, eyes wide, his bravado crumbling. He tried to plead, stammering out excuses, but it was too late. The evidence was all on tape. Kyle with the girl, his intentions clear as day. He was caught. As the chaos continued downstairs, I had one more thing to do before we wrapped up the night. Steve. I kept one eye on the camera feed, making sure the rest of the parents were handling Kyle, and quietly made my way over to Steve's car. My heart hammered in my chest, but I couldn't let him get away with whatever he was hiding. Not after everything I'd seen. I slipped into his car, quick, silent. I'd done this 1,000 times before. His phone was sitting on the passenger seat, and the burner he used was in the jacket he put on the passenger seat, and within moments I had cloned both phonies. Everything on his device was now in my possession, and every future call and text will be cataloged for later confrontation. If he was working with the dealers, I was about to find out and make sure Steve becomes someone's bitch in prison for playing us, and may even tell John so he gives him a farewell beating before going off to prison. But the moment I slipped out of the car, my phone buzzed. Steve got a new message. I glanced at the screen. Get out. Now. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It wasn't one of the parents. It wasn't anyone from our team. The number was unfamiliar, but the message was clear. Someone else was watching and saw me. The moment I received that message, get out. Now. My stomach churned. I'd been careful, covering every track, every move. How the hell was someone watching? I looked around, scanning the dark streets surrounding Steve's car. My pulse raced as the realization dawned. Steve, that traitorous son of a bitch. I thought he was just a pawn, maybe selling a few drugs, but I was wrong. It was worse, so much worse. I sped back to the hotel, my brain spinning with new pieces of the puzzle. Something wasn't adding up. Why would Steve, a man pretending to be a grieving father like the rest of us, take money in an alley during our op? It didn't take long for the sickening truth to unravel as I dug through his phones, emails, and some laughable encryption on his burner. I hacked into Steve's phone. The messages were right there, laid out in cold, hard text. He had willingly sacrificed his daughter to prove his loyalty to the cartel. His boss, a high-ranking lieutenant, had demanded it, proof that Steve was committed to the business. And Kyle? That smug little prick wasn't acting alone. His friend, Oscar, was pushing him, egging him on to drug and assault the girls. Oscar's father was the cartel lieutenant overseeing Steve, and this whole operation was more than just some frat boy power trip. It was orchestrated, systematic. Oscar and Kyle were nothing more than tools. My mind began to race to the other extremes in the face of who was really behind this. Are they also kidnapping and trafficking girls? What did I stumble onto? Did I just make my family a target? Do they know who I am? Then I saw it, the email Steve had sent days ago, just before I'd sent out the evidence to the other parents. It was addressed to his cartel boss. He's digging. The hacker's a problem. Keep an eye on him. The message was time-stamped just before everything started going south. I wasn't as covert as I thought. I wasn't the hunter. I was the prey. My blood ran cold, adrenaline flooding my veins. Everything I'd done, everything I'd planned, they were watching. They knew. If Steve had informed them about me, it wouldn't be long before they made their move. I called John immediately, my voice barely holding together. John, they know. They've been watching us. Tell me something I don't know. Some assholes were on me after grabbing Kyle, and it took everything I had to shake them. Who is it? Do you know? John's voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying tension. Steve. He's been working for the cartel, giving them information. Kyle's part of it too. We're compromised. John didn't even hesitate. Meet me at the spot. Keep your eyes peeled. I am putting our little friend here on ice with some night-night juice. I grabbed my gear and bolted, my mind racing through the possibilities. If the cartel was coming, they wouldn't just be sending 1 or 2 guys, they'd be sending an army. I didn't even make it 2 blocks before I spotted them. Blacked out SUVs, subtle but unmistakable. They were tailing me, waiting for their moment to strike. My mind screamed at me to run, but I kept my cool. I called John again. They're on me. I've got eyes on them too. Stay sharp. We split, meet at the fallback location. I hung up and hit the gas, swerving through side streets and alleyways. The SUVs followed, headlights cutting through the night like hunters on a mission. I zigzagged through the city, narrowly avoiding a few close calls, my mind racing as fast as the engine. But I'd been here before, different enemies, same tactics. John was no stranger to evasion either. I knew he'd slip away just like me. After what felt like hours, I finally lost them. I parked my car behind a rundown gas station and pulled out my phone. John was already waiting at the fallback spot, a remote cabin we'd scouted weeks ago, far off the grid. I'd make it there, but this wasn't over. Not even close. When I finally arrived, John was waiting by the door, scanning the perimeter. His military training was in full swing, eyes cold and calculating. You good? Yeah, I lost them. For now. Steve. I clenched my fists. We're bringing him in and caging him right next to this animal, kicking Kyle's chained feet as I said this. That bastard's got answers we need. John's jaw tightened, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was war. The cartel had made it personal, and we were going to hit back harder than they could have imagined. But first, Steve needed to pay for what he'd done. John pulled out his phone, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm calling in some favors. My old squad's still kicking, and they owe me a few. We're gonna make sure these cartel assholes know they picked the wrong men to fuck with." I nodded, already pulling up contacts of my own. I hadn't dipped into my old underground network in years, but I'd thrived there once, and I wasn't above crawling back in if it meant burning Steve, Kyle, and the cartel to the ground. Sometimes you need to fight darkness with darkness. Verdicts can be bought, but vigilantes can't be swayed. But before we did anything, there was one thing left to handle. "Steve, we're gonna grab him first. Have a little chat," John said, his voice calm but seething with rage. I smirked, feeling the adrenaline surge back. Yeah, he's got a lot to answer for. As the sun began to rise, we sat in silence, mentally preparing for the storm we were about to unleash. The plan was in motion, the pieces falling into place. But this time, we weren't playing defense. We were bringing the fight to them. And Steve, he was going to regret ever betraying his daughter. The cabin was still and cold in the early hours of the morning. The distant hum of crickets the only sound in the air. Outside, the trees stretched into the black sky, thick and unforgiving. I sat at the rough wooden table, the glow of my laptop casting sharp shadows across the room. My fingers moved with precision over the keys, finishing the final touches on the ransomware. This was no ordinary virus. It was a motherfucker of my own making, armed with post-quantum encryption I designed for DoD use as part of my day job, along with a fail-safe that accelerates file deletion if any tampering is detected. I was sure this would result in my death at some point in the future. I didn't give a fuck. Sacrificing it all for Lily is part of being a dad. I smiled to myself, knowing that only a handful of people in the world, deep inside the NSA, could even hope to crack it. The darkness outside was pressing in, but inside, my mind was sharp. Every camera, every GPS tracker I had hacked into their system was now locked tight. The cartel's entire electronic network was in my hands, and soon, they'd be cut off from everything. Their messages, their surveillance, their bank accounts, gone like a flick of a switch. All I had to do was hit enter, and the clock would start ticking. I could almost feel the panic they'd experience when they realized just how deep I'd gone. The cabin door creaked open, and John stepped inside, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. He was a hulking figure, his eyes cold and steady as always. Behind him, the wind swirled through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth. He gave me a sharp nod, his phone pressed to his ear as he muttered something to one of his military buddies. "Families are at the base," he said, hanging up the phone. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "The generals got them locked down. We're in the clear for now. By the way, you do have some explaining to do to your wife." I nodded, my mind still half-focused on the ransomware. "Fuck. She hates surprises, and this is the king of surprises. At least everyone is safe. Once I launch this, their network's done. They'll have to go old school without digital communications, warnings, or backups though, and the best part is they won't even know what hit them." John's face didn't change, but his eyes gleamed with a cold satisfaction. "Perfect. We hit them tonight." The plan was already in place. John had pulled a lot of strings to get the families to safety. They were tucked away at Fort Cavazos, guarded by soldiers who owed John more than just favors. It wasn't easy to call in a favor like that, but John wasn't the kind of man who gave a damn about the difficulty. The general, a man John had helped promote years ago, had made sure everything was airtight. The cartel wouldn't get anywhere near them. A sudden buzzing pulled me out of my thoughts. My phone lit up, and for the first time in what felt like days, I saw a text from Lily. "Dad, can you call me?" Her words were heavy with emotion, and for a moment, I hesitated. I hadn't expected her to reach out. Ever since she told me what had happened, Lily had retreated into herself, barely speaking to me, barely making eye contact. The girl who once lit up every room had disappeared, replaced by a shell of someone who couldn't shake off the darkness. But now she knew. She knew what I was doing. My chest tightened, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The last time I'd seen her, she was practically hollow, carrying the weight of what happened to her like an anchor. But tonight, when I called her to let her know what was going on, something shifted. For the first time in weeks, she sounded alive. "You're doing this for me?" she asked, her voice shaking with emotion. "Of course I am. I'd do anything for you," I replied, my throat tightening. She let out a shaky breath, and for a second, I thought she was going to break down. But instead, she whispered, "Thank you. I love you, Dad. Please be careful and come back to us." The words hit me like a punch. I sat there for a moment, unable to find the words, but something inside me felt lighter. I swallowed hard, unable to reply. It didn't matter. She knew, and that was enough to keep me going. Holding back tears, I shakily replied, "I love you too, Princess. I'll be back before you know it. I have to go now." I hung up knowing that was probably the most optimistic lie I've ever said, and maybe the last time I'll speak to her. The sun was beginning to creep over the horizon, casting an eerie glow through the forest. The shadows outside the cabin seemed to stretch and pulse, as if the night itself was waiting for something. John was by the door again, his hand on his sidearm, eyes scanning the perimeter. We were almost ready to move. "I've got my guys in place," John said, his voice cutting through the silence. "They're set for the extraction. We hit Steve and we hit him hard. The cartel won't know what's happening until it's too late." I stood and closed the laptop with a snap. "Their network's cut. No one's coming to help them." John's jaw tightened. "Good. Let's see how they like being in the dark." He climbed into the SUV, the weight of what was about to happen heavy in the air. As we drove, the tension between us was thick, but there was no need for words. John and I had been through enough to know what was at stake. This wasn't just about Steve or Kyle or the cartel anymore. This was about ending it. Tonight, the streets were quiet as we rolled into the suburbs where Steve's house stood, unassuming and bland, like every other cookie-cutter home on the block. But inside, the truth festered. Inside, Steve was a rat, offering up his own daughter to keep himself in the cartel's good graces. And we were going to make him answer for every sick choice he'd made. John's men were already in position when we pulled up. Providing overwatch, I monitored the diverted feeds as they moved like shadows, blending into the early morning light, weapons at the ready. It wasn't long before they heard the rustle of footsteps, the quiet click of safety switches being flipped. John and his team moved in sync, slipping around the side of the house, taking positions near the back door. The plan was simple. Breach, grab Steve, and get out before the cartel even knew what hit them. With a green light to John, he kicked in the back door, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood like a crack of thunder. Inside, the house was dark, but the team was wearing night vision goggles and didn't need light. They knew exactly where that cunt, Steve, was and the positions of 3 other tangos in the house with him. The 3 tangos were dead before they could react to the sound of the door being kicked in, and everyone converged upon the prize. The first thing I saw in the body cam feed was his face. The fear in his eyes was immediate, raw. He stumbled back, his hands up in surrender, but no one was interested in his cowardice. John's fist connected with his jaw before he could speak, sending him crashing to the floor. "You bastard," John growled, grabbing him by the collar. "You sacrificed your own daughter." Steve's eyes were wide, blood trickling from his lip, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. He knew there was nothing he could say that would save him now. John stepped forward, looming over Steve like a predator ready to strike. "You're gonna tell us everything. And if you lie even once, I'll make sure you regret it." Steve's lip quivered as John dragged him to his feet, pushing him toward the door. We didn't have much time. The cartel's men would be here soon, and we needed to be gone before they showed up. The team followed John out to the SUV, shoving Steve into the back seat as they climbed in. The drive back to the cabin was tense, every moment ticking down like a bomb waiting to explode. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the cartel's blacked-out SUVs pulling up behind us. But for now, we were in the clear. When we arrived, John's men locked Steve in one of the back rooms of the cabin, securing him to a chair, his hands zip-tied behind his back. It was time for answers. I stepped forward, my eyes locked on Steve's as I spoke. "Start talking. Now." His voice was shaky, his breath uneven. I didn't have a choice. They would have killed me. "You had a choice," John cut in, his voice cold. "You always have a choice. You sick fuck. You could have protected your daughter. Instead, you threw her to the wolves. Why should we allow you to continue wasting the air we breathe?" Steve shook his head, tears brimming in his eyes. "You don't understand. Oscar's father, he runs everything. He controls the drugs, the trafficking. Kyle was just following orders." I felt a wave of disgust roll through me. So this was bigger than I thought. The cartel wasn't just supplying drugs. They were using the frat boys as pawns in a trafficking ring. And Steve, the coward, had gone along with it to save his own skin. "You're going to give us everything you have," I said, my voice low. "Names, locations, contacts. And if you even think about holding back—" "I won't," Steve interrupted, his voice breaking. "I'll tell you everything." John turned to me, his eyes hard. "We need to move fast. The cartel's already on high alert. We're going to hit them where it hurts." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Let's finish this." Hours later, we had it all, every name, every location, and every vile operation. I felt like I needed a shower afterwards. John maintained his composure throughout the Inquisition, but at the end he could contain himself no more. He smiled at Steve and thanked him coldly before informing him that it was time to repent. Without warning, he grabs Steve and hurls him and the chair he is tied to against the cabin wall. Then nonchalantly picks him up again by his right foot and arm and swings him against the wall again. "John, don't kill him. We don't want to be facing the death penalty here," I shouted, trying to talk reason into him. "Don't worry, Mason. I am not going to kill him, but he'll beg for death when I'm done." For the next few minutes, John continued to toss Steve about like a rag doll. It finally ended when Steve passed out from the pain. He looked over at Kyle, who watched the whole thing horrified, and told him, "He arranged to hurt my baby, but you actually hurt her. Even the devil will blush at what the fuck I'm going to do to you." With that off his chest, John stepped outside to make the final calls, arranging for his squad to execute the rest of the plan. Meanwhile, I gave Kyle some more sedative so he'd shut the fuck up with the pleading. Now the only sounds remaining were the crickets and Steve's raspy breath as I sat down at my laptop, pulling up every file, every connection Steve had handed over. It was time to dismantle the cartel's reign of terror over these girls from the inside out. All we cared about was our own backyard. Once we were done with that, we would hand everything over to the authorities to handle. Maybe even as part of an immunity deal, who knows? Stranger things have happened. As the sun began to set, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The storm was coming, and this time we were ready. The cabin was dark, save for the faint glow of my laptop casting eerie shadows across the room. Outside, the wind had picked up, pushing the trees into a slow dance. John was pacing again, his combat boots thudding on the wooden floor like a ticking clock. Steve was still tied up in the back room, his mouth taped shut, blood caking the corners of his lips from John's earlier work. I didn't say anything when John beat the hell out of him. I had my own darkness to contend with. The air hung heavy with anticipation, the distant wind whistling through the trees like a warning. I was finishing up my final touches on the cartel's network lockdown. I had them dead to rights. They were blind, deaf, and dumb just the way I liked it. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt the unease prickling the back of my neck. I knew damn well that people like Oscar's father didn't go down without a fight. The cartel wasn't going to sit idle. John could sense it too. We weren't the type to waltz into a situation without a backup plan. John paced near the window, scanning the dark tree-line for movement, his every motion deliberate, purposeful. His old combat buddies, a group of seasoned warriors he trusted with his life, were waiting just outside the main zone, ready to strike at a moment's notice. "They're ready to roll," John said, his voice as cold as steel. "If we're walking into a trap, they'll hit hard from the rear. We're not taking any chances." I nodded, my fingers still hovering over the keys of my laptop. "Good. We don't get second chances with these bastards. This ends tonight, one way or another." John leaned against the doorframe, his eyes fixed on me. "And Mason, no one makes a move until we're sure we have the upper hand. I don't want my men walking into something they can't get out of." "Agreed," I replied, glancing at the feeds one last time. "We're in, but this place is built like a fortress. Something feels off." The truth was, we both knew we weren't just dealing with the usual thugs anymore. The cartel had something darker, more sinister up its sleeve. I pulled up the final pieces of intel from Steve, triple-checking the coordinates. There were things Steve had shared that didn't quite fit, details that were too vague. John's team had cleared the perimeters of the cartel's hideout, but if there were hidden rooms, underground tunnels, or secret entrances, we needed to be ready. John's combat buddies were already set, waiting in the shadows of the tree-line just beyond the warehouse where the cartel was holed up. The plan was simple. John's team would breach the building from the front, drawing the cartel's attention, while his combat buddies stayed back and observed, ready to move in if things went sideways. We'd anticipated something bigger, a hidden play we weren't seeing. I didn't like surprises, and John sure as hell didn't either. "You think we're being watched?" I asked, my eyes scanning the flickering feeds one more time. "I don't think." "I know." John's voice was low, steady. "I felt it since we started. But that's why my men are holding back. Let them think we're walking into their trap. They won't expect us to have backup." I nodded, my gut tightening with every second that passed. "We're not playing defense tonight. We finished this." We rolled into the outskirts of town under the cover of darkness. The SUV's engine hummed quietly as we pulled up a few hundred feet from the cartel's stronghold, a repurposed warehouse that sat like a looming shadow on the horizon. The warehouse was an old relic, rusting and crumbling on the outside, but I knew what lay inside was anything but old or fragile. I could feel the tension in my body ratchet up another notch, the adrenaline buzzing just under my skin. John's men were already in position, eyes on the prize, weapons drawn but silent, waiting for our signal. Through the feed, I could see every angle of the warehouse. Guards patrolling lazily, thinking no one could touch them, unaware of how deep in the dark they were. But John and I both knew that confidence could turn into overconfidence real quick. We had to be smarter. We couldn't afford to make a single mistake. We stepped out of the SUV, crouching low and blending into the shadows as we approached the perimeter. John's earpiece buzzed quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "Hold position. Wait for the breach." The cartel didn't know it yet, but tonight was the night their empire started to crumble. I stayed low, ducking behind a rusted dumpster near the entrance, laptop open on my lap, scanning every feed, looking for any sign of trouble. My heart pounded as I hacked deeper into the cartel system, making sure every exit route, every alarm, every digital safety net they had in place was cut. "All feeds are clear," I whispered into my mic. "You're good to go." "Copy that," John replied, giving the signal. His team moved like shadows, slipping through the cracked side door of the warehouse with military precision. Inside, the night vision cameras flickered to life on my screen. The guards were taken out in seconds, a clean, silent sweep. But something still didn't feel right. The layout of the warehouse wasn't matching up with the blueprints. There were more rooms, hidden sections that weren't on any map we'd seen. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as John's team descended deeper into the building. "They're hiding something," I whispered, my fingers flying across the keys as I scanned for any sign of a trap. John's voice crackled through the earpiece. "We found a staircase. Looks like it leads to some sort of underground level." "What the fuck is this? Underground levels?" Of course, my stomach twisted. This was the part we hadn't anticipated. I quickly cross-referenced the files Steve had given us with the new data I was pulling from the building's internal systems. "John, this wasn't on any of the plans. I'm not seeing any feeds down there. It's a black zone." John paused. "We've come this far. We're going in." My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the feed from the warehouse go dark. John's men were moving into the unknown, and I was blind. For the first time since this operation began, I couldn't see what was happening. "John, be careful. This feels like a setup." "I know." John's voice came through the earpiece, but it was distant, distracted. "We've got eyes on something. It's bad, Mason. Real bad." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What is it?" Before John could answer, the comms went silent. I bolted from my position, running toward the warehouse with my heart in my throat. If John's team was compromised, we were all in danger. I raced through the broken entrance, darting between piles of rusted debris, making my way down to the underground level. My mind was a blur, thoughts of Lily flashing through my head with every step I took. I couldn't afford to lose John, not now. Not when we were this close. The air down in the underground levels was thick and stale, the dim lights flickering weakly as I made my way deeper into the belly of the beast. The sound of my footsteps echoed off the cold, concrete walls, and I could feel the weight of every moment pressing down on me. I reached the end of the hallway, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I spotted John's men gathered near a massive steel door. They were silent, their faces grim as they stared into the room beyond. And then I saw it. The room was lined with metal cages, the kind you'd expect to see in some third-world black site. Women, young girls huddled together, their eyes wide with terror. They were barely conscious, their bodies slumped against the bars of their cages. It was worse than anything I had imagined. But that wasn't the worst part. At the center of the room, standing over John's men like a specter, was a figure I hadn't anticipated. Oscar's father, the cartel's lieutenant. His cold eyes gleamed with triumph, and beside him Oscar stood, his arms crossed, a smug grin plastered across his face. "We knew you'd come," Oscar's father said, his voice smooth, dangerous. "You've made quite the mess of things, Mason, but you should have known better. You can't hide from us." John's men stood frozen, their weapons trained on the cartel lieutenant, but something held them back. This was bigger than just a raid. This was personal, and we'd walked straight into it. The trap had been set, and we were caught. The air in the underground chamber was suffocating. Oscar's father stood tall, his cold eyes fixed on me, and beside him, Oscar smirked like a smug devil. My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of the moment pressing down hard. John's forward team, lying on the ground, looked overpowered, disarmed, and restrained. This was the trap, and we had walked straight into it. But I wasn't blind to the possibility of this kind of betrayal. John wasn't either. The rest of John's men, his old combat buddies, were still outside, positioned on standby, waiting for the order to storm in. They had the skills, and they knew how to strike when the timing was right. I felt the weight of it all crushing down on me. Every single decision, every risk I'd taken. This was bigger than just getting Kyle, bigger than bringing down a few frat boys. This was an entire network of trafficking, drugs, and violence. And now it felt like we'd walked right into the belly of the beast, only to find the jaws already closing in around us. Oscar's father, the cartel lieutenant, took another step forward, his smirk growing wider. "You should have known you'd never make it out of this alive, Mason. This isn't some little vendetta you can solve with a laptop and a few guns. This is my world." He gestured to the caged girls with an air of casual cruelty. "All this is just the tip of the iceberg. You think you've done something by shutting down our network? Please, we've got other ways you haven't even imagined." I felt John tense next to me, his hand on his weapon, but we both knew the situation wasn't in our favor. We were outnumbered, outgunned. If John's backup was going to strike, they needed to do it now. I glanced at him, my voice barely a whisper. "Any word from your guys?" John's jaw clenched. "Nothing yet. They're supposed to be on standby." I nodded, my mind racing. It was all coming down to this moment, and I could feel the odds slipping out of our favor with every passing second. My laptop was still running, and while I'd effectively cut off their communications, the cartel had more tricks up its sleeve than I'd accounted for. They'd anticipated the digital blackout, but I still had one more move left. Oscar's father chuckled, stepping closer. "I'm going to enjoy watching you fall apart, Mason. First we'll kill you, then we'll find your family. You really thought you could outsmart us? This is what happens when amateurs get involved in a professional's game." I felt my pulse quicken, the blood roaring in my ears. He thought he had me. He thought he'd beaten me. But this bastard didn't know me. "You're wrong," I said, my voice low and even. "You don't know who the fuck you're dealing with." Oscar's father tilted his head, that smirk never leaving his face. "Oh? Enlighten me, then. What's your next brilliant move?" I clicked the send key on my phone. The lights in the underground chamber flickered, then died. The entire building plunged into darkness, save for the dim glow of the emergency lights lining the floor. The effect was immediate. The cartel's men started shouting, their voices rising in panic as they fumbled in the sudden dark. Oscar and his father stood frozen for a moment, clearly not expecting this. At that moment, the world exploded into chaos. The door to the underground chamber burst open, and John's men poured in like a wave of shadows. Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks of suppressed shots cutting through the air as the cartel's guards were picked off one by one. The lieutenant's smug grin vanished, replaced by shock as John's combat buddies swarmed the room, overpowering the cartel's forces in seconds. Oscar and his father scrambled to retreat, but John was already on him with a ferocity I'd never seen before. He moved with precision, taking out two of the remaining guards with quick, brutal strikes. In a matter of minutes, the chaotic carnage suddenly became a cacophony of defeated groans and zipping of zip ties. The fight had been brutal, fast, and decisive. Oscar's smug face was pressed to the cold concrete floor, his confidence shattered. His father knelt beside him, hands bound, still seething with rage. But something about Oscar hadn't changed. He was still convinced that his money, his influence, could get him out of this. What he didn't realize was that John saw Oscar was there and participated in his daughter's sexual assault along with Kyle. Jail would be a miracle for him. John caught Oscar by the collar, slamming him into the concrete wall with a force that made the entire room shake. "You don't get to walk away from this," John growled, his voice low and deadly. "You and your father. You're going to answer for everything." Oscar, blood dripping from his nose, let out a weak laugh, his eyes glinting with arrogant defiance. "We'll just pay our way out, like every other time," he sneered. "You really think this is the first time we've been caught? Money talks, my friend. You can't touch us." John's expression didn't change, but the fury in his eyes darkened. He leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Pay your way out of this." With a swift, brutal motion, John snapped Oscar's neck. The crack echoed through the chamber, and Oscar's body crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The smirk wiped clean from his face forever. Oscar's father, witnessing his son's execution, let out a guttural roar, his anger exploding into action. He surged to his feet, charging at John with blind rage. But before he could get close, one of John's men fired a clean, single headshot. The bullet tore through the man's skull, dropping him to the ground instantly, his blood splattering across the cold stone floor. John looked down at their lifeless bodies, his breathing heavy but controlled. "Hell it is then," he muttered under his breath. He kicked Oscar's limp body with disgust before turning his cold gaze to the mess they'd made. "Enjoy it, motherfuckers." I stood amidst the chaos, my heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. John's men were sweeping the room, securing the cartel members, ensuring no one got back up. My attention had shifted to the women we had just freed, their haunted eyes reflecting the horror they'd endured. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only a small victory, that the war wasn't over yet. But for now, we had done something. We had saved them. The girls were huddled in the corner, shaken but alive. They were free. I walked over to one of John's men, who was busy securing the rest of the men with zip ties. "What's the situation outside?" I asked. "All clear," the man replied, his voice steady. "We've neutralized the rest of the cartel's men. No reinforcements coming." I nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. The job wasn't over, but at least for now we were safe. John walked up beside me, wiping the blood from his knuckles. "Good work, Mason. We couldn't have done this without you." I shook my head. "We couldn't have done it without each other." There was a long silence as we stood there, watching as the cartel's leaders were dragged away, their empire crumbling beneath them. I should have felt satisfaction, maybe even triumph. But all I felt was exhaustion. The weight of everything we'd been through was finally catching up to me. John glanced at me, his expression softer now. "What's next for you?" I didn't answer right away. My thoughts were with Lily, with the family I'd risked everything for. "I'm going home," I said finally, my voice quiet. "It's time to be with my daughter." John nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You did good tonight, Mason. You did right by her." I didn't respond. I just nodded, feeling the exhaustion pulling at me. There was still so much to do. Reports to file, evidence to hand over to the authorities, and a reckoning for everyone involved. But for now, all I wanted was to see Lily's face, to tell her that it was over, but there was still one more loose end. Fucking Kyle. The drive back to the cabin was quiet. John's team had secured the area, ensuring no one was left behind. The sun was starting to rise, casting a soft glow over the landscape. It was surreal, seeing the world so peaceful after the chaos we'd just survived. But I knew better. Peace was fragile, and it was up to people like John and me to keep it intact. When we arrived, Kyle was tied up in the corner of the room, unconscious but still breathing. His once smug face now swollen from the beating John had given him earlier. John crouched down beside him, checking his pulse, then looked up at me. His eyes, dark and full of purpose, told me everything I needed to know. Kyle was going to pay too. Without a word, John grabbed one of Kyle's legs and twisted, a sickening crack echoing through the room as the bones snapped like a twig. Kyle screamed, his eyes snapping open in agony. John didn't stop. He moved to the other leg, methodically destroying Kyle's knees, his spine. By the time John stood back up, Kyle was a sobbing, crippled mess, his lower body completely useless. "He'll live," John said coldly, wiping the blood from his hands. "But he won't walk or fuck ever again. Even if he pays his way out, he will still pay for the rest of his life." Fuck him. I stood there, watching the broken heap that Kyle had become. He deserved every bit of it and more. As the sun rose over the distant treeline, John's men began gathering the cartel members and the freed girls. The air was lighter now, but only slightly. We had won the battle, but the war wasn't over. And as we emerged from the underground hell, I saw them, FBI agents, waiting for us. "Shit," I muttered, glancing at John. John's expression didn't change. He had seen this coming. Of course, the FBI had been watching the cartel too. There was no way they wouldn't have caught wind of an operation this big. The agents moved in quickly, guns drawn but no longer needed. John's men stood down, raising their hands in compliance as the agents swarmed us. "John Harlow," one of the agents said, stepping forward with a grim look on his face. "Mason Connor, you're both under arrest." I could feel the weight of the moment crashing down on me. We had won. We had taken down the cartel. But now we were about to pay the price. The agent continued, "You and your men have been interfering with an active federal investigation. Normally, this would mean serious prison time, but you've done us a favor by taking these guys down." I glanced at John, who remained silent, his jaw clenched. "Did you watch them rape my little girl and do nothing about it? Did you enjoy watching? Fucking pussies." The agent's eyes softened slightly. "I empathize, and know we can make a deal where you avoid any and all charges." I exhaled, feeling the tension ease just a fraction. "What kind of deal?" The agent crossed his arms. "You work with us. Give us the rest of the cartel's operations, every name, every location, and we'll consider dropping the charges. You'd be free men, but under our watch." I looked at John, who raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. The choice was clear. Go to prison or continue the fight, this time with the FBI. John finally spoke. "And if we say no?" The agent's lips thinned into a smile. "Then you rot in a federal prison for the rest of your lives. But you're smart enough to know that's not the best option." I clenched my fists, the reality of the situation sinking in. We'd fought so hard to get to this point, but we were still trapped just like everyone else. But this was an out, a chance to keep going. John met my gaze, his eyes searching mine for an answer. I nodded. "We'll take the deal," John said, his voice steady. "But on our terms." The agent nodded. "You'll have them. You've earned that much." The sun was high in the sky by the time the FBI had wrapped up. The cartel's leaders were dead, their empire crumbling, but the work wasn't done. As I stood there, watching the FBI haul the remaining prisoners into armored trucks, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. John walked up beside me, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Looks like we're working for the feds now." "Yeah," I said, my voice distant, "but at least we're still in the game." He chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "That we are." I looked out at the horizon, wondering what was next. We had taken down one monster, but I knew there were others out there, lurking in the shadows. The FBI deal had given us a way out, but it had also pulled us deeper into a world I wasn't sure we could ever escape. Think we'll ever get a chance to breathe? I asked. John shook his head. No, but we're good at this. And as long as there are bastards like Oscar and his father out there, we'll keep doing what we do. I nodded, the weight of the moment settling in. We had won today, but the fight was far from over. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. For now, we had a new mission. And this time, we weren't playing by anyone else's rules. The end? For now.